Welcome to this session, our second day of the Legends discussions. When this idea of the Legends happened last summer, when I was out in Aspen and having dinner with Warren, we thought about bringing together people that have done so many amazing things in our field of tuba and euphonium, and to get them together to share some stories, a little bit about their history, a little bit about their interactions. In this particular case, we're going to talk potentially about some conductors and recordings and stuff, but it gives me an incredible pleasure to welcome these three fine gentlemen. Wes Jacobs, who played in Detroit Symphony for many, many years, Floyd Cooley from San Francisco, and Gene Pokorny currently in Chicago. And I just wanted to start, we'll maybe start with Wes here. That I wanted to have you tell a lot of the students. We know about the pinnacles of all your careers, but maybe share a little bit about the early times, maybe a little bit about your teachers that you had, early inspirations, and maybe the moment where things clicked for you. And we'll start with Wes, if that's okay.
Oh, well, early was really early. It was a long way into the last century. And I was, at that time, I was playing tuba and string bass. I played with the Carpenters, a popular music group, for actually a number of years. Even after I got into the symphony here in Detroit, I continued playing with them sometimes and recording. But starting out, I began really self-taught, unfortunately. And then I ended up attending Cal State Long Beach, a great music school at that time, probably still is. And I studied with a bass trombone player named Robert Simigran, who started to, has anyone ever heard of him, by the way?
I'm
Oh,
not,
Gene.
Gene knows
Yeah,
him. I had one question for you, Wes.
yeah.
So explain to a lot of people probably don't know who the Carpenters are, and that they were probably one of the most, up and coming famous groups at that point in time, right?
Yes, the Carpenters, I think they sold 150 million records, something like that. It was very, very popular. A lot of number one songs, and they're still actually popular in Japan. Very popular, I think, in Japan and also the UK. So yeah, it was a big deal. It was a big deal, and it was really good music. I mean, it was very very polished, right, to the smallest musical details. But it wasn't for me. There was something about the idea of going on the road and playing the same concert every night for a year that didn't sit well with me. And I love classical music, and I love the tuba. So I finally decided I'm going to put my emphasis on playing the tuba. Going to Cal State Long Beach, I started with Bob Simigran, who straightened me out quite a bit. He put me on a completely different track than the wrong track that I was on, as I was self-taught. I studied with the great Tommy Johnson. There's no teacher that I've ever had that was better than Tommy. And like a lot of people my age, I made the trek to Chicago and studied with Jake, and I also went to Juilliard and studied with Joe Novotny, who was in the New York Philharmonic. But I studied with Roger Bobo when I was in Los Angeles also. But I think that the big impact was from Tommy Johnson. That guy was amazing, and as I think we all know. And I think Tommy was responsible for one of the three, I would call them, turning points in my beginning in music. And Tommy was a master teacher, but he also, with me, he was able to, I think he understood my psychology better than anyone else had. And at that time, I was very driven, very competitive, big ego. Shouldn't have had that, but I did. And Tommy he had a teaching method that I didn't know he was doing for almost a year. I would go to my lesson, and I would play, he would play, I would practice like crazy, and of course, he would always sound better than I sounded, obviously. I mean, but it wasn't that much better sometimes. And I kept thinking, if I just work a little harder, I'm going to go next week and I'm going to play something better than that guy. And I was driven by my ego and my competitiveness, and he knew what he was doing. I know he did. And this went on for a long time, and I was just working myself to the bone, trying to play better than Tommy. Then I went to a lesson, and I forget why he did this, but he picked up his horn and he played this lip slur by Robert Marsteller. It's a very complex thing that goes like 2.5 or 3 octaves. He just took his horn up. He didn't have any playing before that. He put it right to his chops, and he played it perfectly. And all the circuits started smoking in my brain. This guy's been messing with me.
Do you think I have a quick question for you. Do you think he ever made like just a little mistake or anything like in the lesson to give you hope as a student? Like, he has a chink in his armor. Because I've heard so many stories about Tommy just being an amazing role model and fantastic teacher.
I think that's possible. I mean, I couldn't point to one, but Tommy had the ability to sound like anything on the tuba.
Yeah.
He would go to a recording session and he could sound great, and they might want him to sound bad, and he could sound bad. He could do anything. So that's possible. I don't know, but as I said, I had three important moments that helped straighten me out, and my big problem was ego. Really, that was what got in my way more than anything else. I went to Juilliard, and I had a very successful entrance at Juilliard. I aced all the auditions. I was in the first orchestra. I was in the National Orchestral Association. Then I went to Carnegie Hall to hear a Chicago Symphony concert. And it took slightly less than a minute. They were playing the Overture to Meistersinger, and I heard Jake, and my ego was really burned up. I mean, I knew that I was not doing a lot of things correctly, and I didn't know, and maybe I still don't know, but I didn't know how he was doing what he did. But I knew that I had to change. I knew that something had to change. So that brought me down a few notches. And the third thing, and Floyd, I'll talk. You can talk about this too. But the third cure for ego-infested tuba playing was I was in the San Francisco Opera Orchestra, and there was an opening the second year I was there in the San Francisco Symphony. And I thought, well, I may as well go get it. Who's going to beat me? And I auditioned, and I played well. I didn't have any problem with my playing. Floyd auditioned, and he won. And so it was something I had to come to grips with. It played with my mind a little bit, and some people would go away from that and make an excuse. That I didn't play well, or the audition wasn't fair, or my valve stuck, or whatever. But none of that happened to me. I actually did play well. So I had to go home and analyze what I did wrong, or what I wasn't doing as well as I should, and it all came back in my judgment to my F tuba playing, because I was not playing the F tuba as a primary instrument. I was playing it as a crutch. And Floyd, and you, I can't speak for you, but I heard you play, and it was like a voice. It was a primary voice that he had, and it was a crutch for me. So I had to reorganize and refocus what I was doing after that, and play like 75% F tuba, 25% C tuba, so I could get the balance straightened out. And so those three things, I think, calmed my ego down and brought my focus into being a tuba player, and not just trying to win or well, I don't know what to say, but it made me focus to do things in a more correct fashion, in my opinion. Thank you, Floyd, by the way. You can send me a bill for that.
No, That's awesome. No, I think you raised a lot of really good points about being around inspirational people, whether it was Tommy or Joe or Jake and stuff like that. And I think I can at least say from my experience of attending conferences and big concerts, you know, you hear different people. First time I heard Brian Bowman, I still remember, like, oh my gosh, I heard Steve Meade live and stuff like that. And so it's an exciting thing. So, Floyd, can you tell us a little bit about your early time and development? And you can probably sum up to the audition that Wes was talking about.
That was a very amazing time. My early years were all vocal. I had an incredible voice teacher in high school who saw me from when I was a soprano until I was a bass. And he went through my change of voice. And from him, I learned a lot of wonderful vocal music, which has stuck with me my whole life. And that's why I ended up playing and recording some vocal music. But my first real tuba teacher was William Bell when I transferred to Indiana as a sophomore. And I was at Indiana for 2 years. And in those 2 years, I got to hear Jacobs play for the first time. But Mr. Bell took me to the Aspen Music Festival for those 2 summers, and I got to play for him. And I met all these incredible musicians and got to play with Robert Nagel and Keith Brown and John Germanaro. And very shortly after that, I got the job in San Francisco. But I got to where I was at the time of the audition, really from what Mr. Bell taught me, all the tricks of the trade, and an audition that we didn't know what we were going to play. So he really prepared me on everything that was possibly out there in the Lou Waldeck book or whatever we could find to play. But at that time when I was at Indiana, I would sneak up and see Mr. Jacobs for a lesson or two. And I say sneak, because if Mr. Bell had known I'd done that, I would have been out on my ear. Back then, teachers were very, very protective, and they really did not want the interaction like, say, Gene and I have. He's in Chicago, I'm in Chicago, we share students. So at the time of the audition, it was really amazing because you were in the finals, you came so close, but it's the other people who were there too, which really, to this day, I cannot believe. Bob Tucci,
Oh, that's
Mel
right.
Mel Culbertson,
Wow.
Jim Self, it was an amazing array, and I really didn't know what I was doing in some ways. I just knew that I could play all the music they put in front of me, and I got away with it. But I played my F tuba the whole time.
I know.
You played the whole audition for San Francisco on your F tuba?
He played the ride on it.
And
What?
it was a rotten Minor Weston 6-valve F that had no low register. And a few years ago, when I was talking with Bob Tucci in Eichenau, he said, you know, you really taught us a lesson that day, because nobody else would have had the guts to just play an F tuba on everything. And I stupidly did. It wasn't that I was so intelligent. It's just what I had. I had a C tuba there, but I didn't pick it up. I thought, well, I'm just going to keep going. I'll just keep going. Anyway, that's enough of me.
So now I have a question. So was it a calculated thing to do F tuba on your entire audition, or was it a?
It's just how it worked out, because the excerpts they started with, you know, De Meister Singer, and then maybe Corsair, Dondi, Symphony on the Mountain Air, a lot of high stuff.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to go to my C tuba because I knew I wouldn't play as well.
Oh, interesting, interesting. That's great. And was there anything the clicking thing that sort of turned the corner for you? I mean, it's great to know about Bill Bell and Jake, and I think that's funny that you sort of had to sneak up to see Jake. There are teachers that are very protective of their students, but certainly I think you see the best artists are a combination of different teachers and different influences. So I think that that's important.
Um, the turning point was the Aspen Music Festival, when I was asked to play the Vaughan Williams Tuba Concerto with the second orchestra, and it was broadcast worldwide on the Voice of America. And the conductor, oh my God, what was his name?
Now, Torchinsky was teaching tuba then, right?
No, it was Bell.
Oh, Bill Bell. Okay, so that was before.
Yeah, yeah. This was a long time ago.
Okay,
These were the summers of 1967 and 68, 67 and 68.
Wow.
And it was driving out of Mr. Bell's old Cadillac, which had no shocks in the back, and it was totally weighted down. And we stopped at Harry Hoffman's liquor store in Denver, one of the largest liquor stores I've ever seen in my life. And we filled up that trunk with Boyden, and
Oh my goodness.
we delivered it to Phil Farkas, another French horn player who played in Cincinnati, Mike Hatfield. And every other week, Mr. Bell said, Floyd, would you take the Cadillac and go to Harry Hoffman's and buy some liquor for us? So I wasn't 21, I was 20 or 19, and I'd go to Denver and stock up for Phil Farkas and Hatfield and Mr. Bell.
Oh my
So
goodness.
it was an amazing time. I was in total awe of what was going on.
That is fabulous. That's amazing to think about. You think about those names. I mean, a lot of the younger students might not know Hatfield and Farkas, but Farkas was a collaborator or a contemporary of Jacobs. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And he wrote a number of fantastic books as well. Great pedagogical text for all brass players. Just amazing stuff. So, Gene, let's move over to you. Tell us a little bit about your early times and the clicking moment.
I grew up in Downey, California, about a quarter mile from where the Apollo spacecraft was built, in a trailer park. True. A lot of people in our trailer park actually worked for North American Rockwell, and they were space engineers. There's a lot of side stories to that, but to get right to the point, I played a little bit of piano, a little bit of clarinet. In fact, one day we had a guy come over to tune our piano. He was a college student at Long Beach College, and he noticed a sousaphone case in the corner, and he said he played a little bit of tuba. I wanted to know if I wanted some tuba lessons, and he took his tuba out and he played some low notes and stuff. I'd never seen a tuba like that. It was like a big baritone, because I'd only seen sousaphones up till then. And I said, well, I'm taking clarinet lessons and piano lessons and stuff. And so I said no to this piano tuner, and that was that. That piano tuner was Wes Jacobs.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I know. Here he was, he was sitting in the front part of my trailer, tuning my piano and asking me if I wanted tuba lessons. And I said, no, you're only a piano tuner.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So Wes,
Yeah.
Where and when did you realize that that was Gene Pokorny? Like, when did you guys make that obviously it wasn't then, because you didn't know that you were Wes Jacobs and that you were Gene Pokorny within Tuba Land. But when did you guys finally make the connection?
I can't answer that. I'm not sure. Do you know, Gene?
No, no, I knew you were. Well, I'd seen your face in the Miraphone catalogs.
Oh, okay.
Actually, with you being credited with being in the San Francisco, was opera, right? Not or ballet?
Opera.
Opera, right? Okay. So, yeah, that's where I saw your face, and of course, I was memorizing whoever's faces were there, and I mean, even Torchinsky was posed with a Miraphone tuba, which I
Yeah.
wonder how much they had to pay him to do that, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So anyway, so that's a close connection with.
Gene, imagine how. I mean, where would you have been if you had started tuba lessons with Wes Jacobs at an
I've
early age? I mean, yeah.
I've thought about that. I thought about that. I mean, it certainly wouldn't have affected my clarinet playing at all. It's that still sucks, you know. So
You
um,
did very well without the lessons.
yeah, but
Yeah.
one wonders, you know, one really does wonder. I would say there were a couple click moments, and one of them actually happened with Floyd, and it was after I'd gotten the job in Israel, in the Israel Philharmonic, and I had left there and was starting in with Utah Symphony, and I was visiting Floyd in August, and Floyd lent me a 5/4 size tuba. I think it was a 5/4 size tuba, and I'd been playing a Miraphone 186 by then. That was the biggest tuba I had, and it was just a big tuba, and I brought it home, and I played it in the Utah Symphony, and all of a sudden, here's a whole other dimension of sound that I had never known could exist with tuba. And I started to appreciate what that sound was, because I always thought, you know, if you have a tuba that sounds like an organ, that sucks, you know, because you want a tuba that sounds like a tuba. And my idea of tuba was what I'd grown up with, which was Tommy Johnson and Roger Bobo, and that was the ideal type of tuba sound. In fact, I'd asked Robert Marsteller, who very fine principal trombone player of the LA Philharmonic. I asked him one day, I said, Mr. Marsteller, could you tell me the difference between West Coast concept of tuba playing and the East Coast concept of tuba playing? And he gets a smile on his face. He says, "Oh, you mean Hollywood versus the rest of the world?" And
Oh,
it
that's
was,
awesome.
it was, but anyway, so that was kind of a moment when Floyd lent me that 5/4 tuba, and I started to think about getting bigger instruments. And I graduated to a 4/4 Hirschberner, then a 6/4 Hirschberner, and then things started to happen in St. Louis and Chicago and that. There was one other moment that I knew something big had happened, and that was I had a I had a week off from the Utah Symphony, and I had taken one lesson from Arnold Jacobs. I had about before, and thought it might be a good idea to go and see this a couple more times. So I went ahead, and I had a week off from Utah, and I went out to Chicago and took about 3 lessons in one week. And you know, every day it was almost the same thing with Arnold Jacobs. And I came back and I played my first rehearsal. Uh, and this one violinist came up to me who I'd never really talked to much before, Richard Stout. Um, we didn't really we weren't really friends. We knew each other from across the, you know, from across the way. And he came up to me at the break, and he said, "What happened to you?" And I said, "What do you mean, what happened to me?" He says, "Everything's different. You sound completely different." And I thought, holy shit, something happened. So Obviously, that week in Chicago did a lot for me and changed some things, some very, very basic conceptual things that I had, and it made a difference. And as much as I got from Tommy Johnson, and he gave me so much, and I concur exactly with what you were saying, Wes. I mean, he was just an amazing teacher. But there was something that happened in that week in Chicago with Arnold Jacobs that I mean, I was being changed, and I didn't even know I was being changed. It was uh, I was kind of on the inside of an after dinner mint. I thought the whole world was green. You know, I was that type of very, very strange. So anyway, that was if that isn't obvious as a click moment, it definitely was for me. So that was a big moment. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's well. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's amazing, and especially like you said, this particular violin player, that he would come up and most of the time the string players don't always talk to the brass players very often. So the
Right.
fact that that was there and so evident. I mean, you hear lots of people talk about the magic that Arnold Jacobs was capable of coaxing and teaching out of students and stuff. And I don't know, Wes and Floyd, would you guys maybe like to share just an insight from Jacobs, or a specific moment from a lesson that you guys had or something like that? Just if you have one.
Floyd, you want to do it?
I was very fortunate to study with Mr. Jacobs from, oh my God, what was it? 1968 to 1998. Is that right? And I would go to Chicago anytime I had a week off. And I got to spend a lot of time watching him teach, and I learned so much from that. But I had been playing in San Francisco 15 years, and I went in for a lesson, and I started warming up, and Mr. Jacobs said, "Floyd, how can you play with such an insufficient tone?" And Mr. Jacobs gave me the idea of the study of sound. And I have to say, it was the hardest subject for me to understand and constantly be aware of the sound that I was making and try to make it as resonant and beautiful as possible. And it was very, very difficult to hear the subtleties that he would turn black into white. And this was what was so amazing about his teaching, besides the psychology. He knew me inside and out psychologically, but he knew how to trigger my ears, and it was absolutely phenomenal. I can't say enough. Everybody has the same great things to say about him, but more than anything, he influenced my teaching of the past 51 years.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Wes, did you want to add something?
Well, I didn't study with Mr. Jacobs, I should say. And I sound like I'm talking about myself, but I didn't study with him as much as Floyd or Gene did. I took a few lessons, and it was when I was in Detroit, so proximity made it easy. But I learned a number of things from him, and I should have taken more lessons. That I regret that now. I can't go back, and that's a message to all the young players. Take the lessons now, because you might not be able to go back later and do it. But I spent a lot time listening to Jake, both sometime in live concerts and a lot of times in recordings, to try to discern what the heck was he doing. Because, for instance, at that Carnegie Hall concert, I noticed it right away that he was present, I could hear him very clearly, but it wasn't really loud. I mean, it wasn't super loud. It was just there. And if you took it away, there would be something really big missing, but it was not overwhelmingly loud. I have my ideas of what he did. And I think one of the things, one of about 6 things that he did, is that he had a real gift for playing and putting energy right at the beginning of each entrance, of each note. A lot of people can't do that because they'll end up rushing, or they're frightened that they're going to make an early entrance, and that you don't want to do that. And also, it's partially dependent upon the brass section, because if you have a brass section that's very aggressive and wants to jump in ahead, especially the trumpets, well, then you can't do that on the tuba. But if you listen to those Chicago recordings, when those big chorales start, Jake is there at the very instant of the attack. And I think that actually helped take the place of playing, too loudly. Really, he had the presence, he had a great sound, and he had the ability to do that. I mean, I tried to do that. It's hard. It's really hard, and I don't think anybody really mastered that technique of early energy on notes better than Jake. He really was amazing at it. He was very, very talented. Yeah. The other thing I would say about Jake is that when I think of Jake, and actually Tommy too in a way, but when I think of Jake, it's hard for me to visualize Jake practicing. Is that, do you have that, Floyd or Gene? Do you?
That's a really interesting concept. I always think about people talking about him and seeing pictures, and when I watched a couple of his master classes, it seems like he always talked about wind and song, but that it's a performance. So I don't know. Floyd, Gene?
Well, it's always seemed to me like that Jake just came down from, I don't know, outer space somewhere with a tuba, and it was there and it was working, and he didn't have to really work on it. I found out later, though, that wasn't totally the case. The principal oboe in Detroit, when I got in the orchestra in 1970, Arnold Mariotti was his name. He went to Curtis with Jake, and they shared an apartment, actually, when they were going to Curtis. And Arnold told me that Jake practiced incessantly, that he just like never stopped, except when he was at school. He didn't practice at school, but he practiced.
I like that the oboe player said that he didn't practice a lot. He said incessantly, that it was a bad thing. We all appreciate that Mr. Jacobs practiced incessantly, just so you know.
Yeah. So that actually made me feel better, because to think that he could just play the tuba like that and then not work on it, that's not good to think about. So I think I learned as much or more from Jake hearing him perform than at the few lessons that I had.
Wow, that's awesome. Great stories. I wanted to shift things a little bit to talk about instrument development, because you 3 gentlemen had a lot to do with development of sort of York-Brunner, the York tuba in Chicago with Gene, and the Yamaha York, and then also the Nerschel tuba with Floyd and stuff. And I didn't know if you wanted to maybe say a couple interesting words about sort of that process, or what you were looking for, or just some insights on the process, because I know there's lots of students that are always looking at equipment and instruments and stuff. But I think you guys had a really, really unique timeline in our history of helping develop these new generations of big instruments. So Floyd, do you want to start talking about?
Before Floyd starts, I'll be back in about a minute. My dogs are barking outside, and it's amazing to be on an international tuba conference, and I can take care of my dogs.
Oh, it is awesome. No problem, Gene.
Be right back. Okay.
Awesome. Go ahead, Floyd.
Well, it was after studying with Jake, it was always a a dream to be able to play the horn that he played. And so I had to deal with what was available. And so for many, many years, I played Holtons. I also played 6/4 Rudy Meinl. But I played Holtons for years. I had 5 different ones. And the quest for a better instrument was always on my mind. The year I played with Chicago, I had a fellow tuba player who was a CAD designer. He and I spent several weekends drawing the instrument on a CAD machine. And during that year, when I was in Salzburg with the CSO, I got together with Walter Nerschel because I wanted to get a new valve set made for one of my Holtons. And eventually I showed the plan to him, and he looked at it and said, we don't build instruments that way. And I soon learned that they built them with strings and cardboard, and a very fundamental way of doing it, but in the hand making, they always came out great.
Yeah.
So the first Nerschel York came out in '94, and I'm not sure how many there are out there right now, but there's in excess of 200.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful instrument. But what I do want to say to the younger players is that it's not a tuba for everybody, and that large of a tuba, whether it's a York Gruner or Rudy Meinl 5/4, 6/4, this is just not the idea in my mind of what tuba playing should be. It's an instrument that you use for a specific purpose and a specific sound. Because in young players, and in my case too, I always sought after having a larger instrument to play. But what I didn't do was I didn't adjust my sound concept. And so the larger the instrument that I got, the more that my sound had a big donut hole in the middle of it. It was fluffy and it just did not have the spark and ring that I wanted. And this is a problem with the big tubas. Unless you change your sound concept of always wanting something bigger, by the time you get to the biggest instrument, there'll be a big hole in the center of your sound. And this is the hard thing about playing the big instruments. And there aren't a lot of people who have mastered these big instruments. And so it's something that today the players you got to be listening to are Gene, Mike Roy Lance. Mike Roy Lance really mastered the concept of taking a big tuba and having a very centered sound that carries incredibly well.
Yeah, fantastic. Wes, you want to talk a little bit?
Well, I was not involved in developing any of the instruments that Floyd mentioned. I worked in the 1970s with Rudolf Meinl well, we built all kinds of instruments. We were just doing a lot of experimenting with both mid-size and then finally a large 6/4 instrument. And after I got the instrument that I liked, I really backed away from that because it took a lot of time for me to work on that. And I didn't, I'm not an expert in it. I can play the tuba, and we worked together on trying to make it usable in the way I wanted to use it. That 6/4 Rudy Meinl that Floyd mentioned, I played one of those in the DSO for many years, actually. And mine was a fabulous instrument, but all of those instruments that I played that had 5 valves, I didn't care for. I played a 4-valve version of that, and it was really nice. Of course, it was a pain in the neck down, in the low register to keep things in tune. There was a lot of jostling with slides and things, but that horn played really well. And I don't think we ever really got that horn the way we wanted it with 5 valves. And then my solution, which never materialized, was to build it as a 4-valve tuba with and then have a removable 5th valve in, like for instance, in the main tuning slide, put a fifth valve in there that you could only put on when you absolutely needed it.
Mm.
That didn't happen. Maybe it shouldn't have happened. I don't know. But that's what I did on development. I worked on the Rudy Meinl instruments, mid-size and large size, and not really on the F tubas either, just the C tubas. So I'm kind of out of this conversation. I think
Yeah.
Gene and Floyd are going to have more to say.
Okay. Gene, you want to talk a little bit about the York tuba and then the Yamaha York tuba now?
Sure. When I got to Chicago, I won the job on a 6-quarter Hirschberner tuba. And it was Charlie Vernon insisted that I play that instrument because I had been playing a 4-quarter Hirschberner beforehand. So it was a 6-quarter that I had just kind of gotten and was still trying to fill out. And he insisted that I play that for the audition, which I did. And I would say when I finally got to the orchestra, all of a sudden I graduated to playing the CSO York tuba. And it took a while to realize just how much better that instrument was than what I was trying to play because it was just a whole nother ball game. I figured it probably took me about 9 months or so to finally fill out that instrument and to actually feel comfortable when I was playing with the orchestra. It was soon after that that Yamaha got in contact with me, and they wanted to take some very, very careful measurements of the York tuba. And so there was a fellow named Mr. Sony who came over, and they wanted to have permission to go ahead and take the York tuba and do a lot of measurements. And I said, look, I'm just the zookeeper. You can play with the animal all you want. You know, you can take measurements, do whatever you want to do. I'm just responsible for it. You know, so
Yeah.
you know, you trust me, I trust you. And they had all types of instruments. They had these instruments that would have a electronic instrument that would have for instance, a pen, a probe, something like this, and you put it on the side of the instrument. It would measure the depth of the metal, and they took practically every square inch of the York tuba to measure everything that was on that instrument. You know, everything from every little brace to the lyre that's still on the front end. That I don't know if Jake actually ever played, St. Patrick's Day parades with the York. Maybe early on he may have, but there is a lyre on the thing.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, well, hey, maybe he marched next to a euphonium player. You never know. So, but they took very careful measurements, and they did all types of testings and all that, and they did with Matsukuma. They did an incredible job at making a very, very reliable copy of that instrument. And then what Nearshall did was fantastic. And whatever is going on with Eastman, because that's a whole nother thing. They kind of took the Yamaha copy and they're doing variations on that, and it seems to change every time something comes back from them. So who knows? I haven't been involved that much with actual instrument design and fooling around and getting out my own solder guns or anything. I haven't done stuff like that, and never really got my hands dirty with that. One thing that I can say is there are the 2 York tubas, the one that Jacobs had, and it was the better of the 2 that that was the better of the two until sometime in the late 1950s, something when he went to have a hole in a lead pipe patched up, came back after lunch, and the repairman had taken the lead pipe off, completely destroyed it, and put a new one on, and it made the better of those two instruments into the lesser of the two. Um, and that instrument is kind of sitting in a closet right now. I'm not wanting anybody to kind of fool around with it until we have enough technology and enough new things that are kind of discovered and uncovered that we might be able to go ahead and get a really fine copier or something of that nature with that instrument.
So are they a match set, or two different, subtly different models, or are they manufactured around the same time?
I think they were manufactured about the same time. I'm not that, actually Floyd would probably know more about that than me, but I don't it was all it was in the late 1930s, I believe, when when these when these instruments were created, and one of them went to Donatelli there with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and the legendary story is he was too big to actually fit on a chair with himself and the tuba together, and he sold it to his young 16-year-old tuba prodigy by the name of Arnold Jacobs, and that's how that instrument got taken over by Jacobs. In fact, Fritz Reiner apparently was supposed to be was the conductor of the Curtis Orchestra, and the tuba was rather big, and supposedly Reiner would have a car sent over to pick up Arnold Jacobs and the tuba and bring him to orchestra rehearsal. I mean, that's the rumor. I mean, who knows?
That's a pretty good service.
Arno Mariotti told me that same story, so it's probably true.
Wow.
Wow. As a college kid, having a car sent by the conductor for you and your tuba, that's impressive. Impressive. Thank you for those. I mean, that's an amazing history. And so both of the York tubas are owned by the Chicago Symphony, correct? For those that don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wanted to shift gears a little bit and maybe talk a little bit about Conductors and any special recordings that you guys have. I mean, each of you had long careers with different conductors, whether it was Schulte in Chicago, Blumstead in San Francisco, and Nimijarvi in Detroit. And I didn't know, and obviously there's a lot of other conductors that you guys have worked with other than those as well, but I don't know if you have some interesting insights or guidance for the students or something that you want to share about that. Is it okay if we start with you, Wes, again?
Sure. In Detroit, I think I played with nine, I'd have to count them and I won't waste time doing that, but I think it's about 9 or 10 music directors over the 38 years that I was there. That includes previous music directors that had come back to guest conduct. And we made recordings, not nearly as many recordings as Gene, and probably not as many as Floyd, I don't know, but I think we made 58 albums while I was in the orchestra. And as far as recordings, some that stand out were in the Dorati years, Antal Dorati as music director. The recording of Petrushka was very good. The recording of 1812 Overture won the Grand Prix du Disque, and that was one of the very earliest fully digital recordings. And as far as music directors and important memories, it's hard to pin it down over a 38-year period. But one thing that does stand out, and it was not exactly due to the performance, although it was a good performance, but the DSO was on tour in Europe. We played in Berlin with Antal Dorati conducting, and Dorati was a very big name, especially in Europe. And when Dorati came out to begin the concert, he got a standing ovation for 12 minutes. That's a lifetime. I mean, it just seemed like it was forever. And we were just sitting there, and Durati knew how to milk the audience too. But yeah, 12 minutes standing ovation, and we hadn't played a note.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. But I think that they remembered Durati. I think the audience remembered Durati playing concerts, conducting concerts, and serving the people during World War II, during and right after World War II. And probably a lot of those people felt this may be the last time we see him, and they gave him the big thank you. And it was an amazing moment. It really was. And after that concert was over, and this was in Berlin, where audiences are usually, I think, from my experience, a little more subdued than they are in Spain, or even France. After the concert, we changed clothes, going out to get on the buses to go back to the hotel, and there were people in the street applauding also. It was really an amazing thing. That's a nice memory.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And that level of appreciation and for longevity. That's great. Gene, do you want to tell us a little bit about, I know at least for me, a lot of the Schulte recordings were things that I listened to again and again and again and again and again and again. And do you have some favorite memories or specific recordings that you guys did?
The most of the Chicago recordings that are my favorite are the ones where I'm not on them.
What?
So I can tell you what those are, but
Sure.
I really, I mean, the recordings that happened in that were recorded at the Krannert Center
Mm-hmm.
at University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and the ones that were done at Medina Temple are in particular very good recordings. Orchestra Hall itself is a very dead place,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a secret to much of anybody. In fact, Jacobs would mention that the best recordings of him at Orchestra Hall were when his sound was accidentally being picked up by the chorus microphones, as in Alexander Nevsky and some of that. In other words, he was a cosmetic outcome of a mistake.
Oh, yeah?
Kind of weird to think of that way, but those recordings are just at least of Orchestra Hall, but the Schulte recordings, say of Mahler 7, that were done down at Champaign-Urbana were just amazing. And what you had was an orchestra that um, had basically had a wool blanket put over them at Orchestra Hall, which doesn't have very much resonance at all. And then you unleash this orchestra in a place that has really good acoustics, whether it's Champaign-Urbana or Carnegie Hall or Musikverein or something, and it's unleashing a monster. And as one of my viola colleagues said, it rendered the string section to being tape hiss. It just there was nothing left, and Schulte was one of these guys who would just he would just keep apparently well he would just beat the orchestra into playing. He'd raise his hands like that, and the brass section play loud, and then he'd put his hands way up like that, and the string section would leave the floor 3 feet off the ground, because of what would go on. Now these are the days before I was in it. This is the old section, and those are tremendous recordings to listen to. Always lots of fun to listen to those. So my favorite recording, and well, one of my favorite recordings, I don't like the piece that much, but Symphonia, the Domestic Symphony of Richard Strauss. I mean, that's a piece where, you start listening to it, you got to stand up and start walking around the room. I mean, you just can't sit in a chair and listen to it. It's You either love it or you hate it. It's so exciting because of what's going on. I mean, between Herseth on trumpet and then Jacobs on the bottom and a bunch of willing participants in the middle, and you got a lot of stuff. So those are my favorite recordings. If I had to pick out something of myself, I'd have to go way back to at the very, very end of my time with the Utah Symphony, and we happened to do a recording of the Star Wars trilogy, and there's a Jabba the Hutt in there that I happened to play, which was reasonably good. It still sounds
Reasonably good,
reasonable.
yes.
It
I'm
was
sure.
well. I mean, I was kind of just it was the first major recording I ever really did, and I had Tommy Johnson on the brain, and you know and just here was this amazing tuba solo to play. Um,
Did that
so
come out on a specific label or anything like that?
that
So
was
that if people wanted to look it up,
Perez Saraband.
Perez Saraband.
Perez Saraband. The conductor was Varujan Kojan. I think it was Kojian. Yeah, it was. By that time, he had changed the spelling of his name. So Kojian, Varujan Kojan, and the Utah Symphony. And it's just music from the Star Wars trilogy.
Wow.
So that was.
I think somebody just put a link in it in the chat for it. So that's awesome.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't I could walk away with that one and say, okay, that was okay, but most of the best recordings I remember, the honest to God, are the ones that I'm not on. They really are. So
Yeah. Well, so Floyd, I wanted to turn to you because one of the recordings that you guys did with Herbert Blumstead, at least for me, were amazing. The Nielsen symphonies, one sort of off the beaten path one that I love dramatically, and I would just go into the Best Buy and just if there was something new with the font, that cover design that London Recordings had for the San Francisco, I just bought it. And there's one of Nielsen's Aladdin Suite, and the opening of that is an amazing. I actually had the Oriental Fest March. I actually last year for IET had an arrangement made, and we have a video of 125 tubas and euphoniums with percussion doing a version of that. And I promise you, while I was conducting, this is not in disrespectful to the tuba euphonium players that were doing it, but while I was conducting that, I was absolutely thinking about that San Francisco Symphony recording the whole time. So, and the other thing that I used to drive my roommates nuts with was the end of the Mathis de Mahler recording that you guys did. I would turn that up so loud and just relish just the purity of everything that was going on there and stuff. And anyway, those are two of my absolute favorite that I listen to a lot. But what about from a playing standpoint?
From a playing standpoint, until Blomstedt, we did very little recording. We recorded with Ozawa and with Devart, but when it finally became apparent that we were going to do a fair number of recordings with Blomstedt, I really experimented and thought about the sound that I wanted to make. I don't think there was any Blomstedt recording I did on that tuba, and they were all on the whole. But my favorite recordings to play, of course, was the Hindemith recording, also Nielsen 4. But I have to also talk about something that Gene talked about. I made 3 solo recordings in my time, but the recording that people know me most for is my recording of Jabba the Hutt with John Williams on Sony. And when I had to learn that piece, I listened to Gene's recording because John Williams came to do a Pops concert, and he fortunately sent the music ahead of time, unlike what he did to John Fletcher, and John Fletcher never got to record it because John saw that piece a day of the recording session and it never really got recorded. So I played it in that concert, and I didn't know it was going to happen, but at the moment that I started that solo, a big spotlight just came down on me and just totally enveloped me, you know, and I jumped up about 10 feet. But later we did this recording for the Star Wars trilogy, and it was a really big moment. Wes was also talking about Conductors, and there was one moment that really stood out, and this is not any great musical thing, but it has to do with our relationship with conductors and how they think about musicians. And we were doing Berlioz' Romeo and Juliet with Roger Norrington, and in there is a place where the orchestra stops. The tuba enters on a G above high C, middle C, and plays 3 octave Gs going down. I played for Norrington several times. So we get to this point, the orchestra stops, and he looks back at me and says, "Good luck."
Floyd, do you know what the words are that the chorus sings right there?
No,
Forgive and forget.
no kidding.
No kidding. No kidding. That's what the
Okay.
chorus sings right there.
Yeah. The other musical moment was with Yuri Termikhanov. We were doing Chai 6, and we get to the chorale at the end. He looks back at the low brass section, smiles, and walks off the stage, and we keep playing. And we play without the conductor. There were really amazing moments. And musical moments that were most incredible moment was in 1973 with Seiji Ozawa in Tchaikovsky Concert Hall in Moscow. And the soloist was one of my teachers, Mislav Rostropovich. And this is the first concert that Rostropovich played in public after his support of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. We did Dvorak Cello Concerto. Rostropovich walks on stage to play, and the crowd claps for an hour. Needless to say, the concert went on a long time, because that's how much they clapped at the end of the concerto.
Wow.
It was really amazing to have been present in such an emotional moment. And then he later toured with us in Japan, and with Seiji also. Anyway, I'll stop.
No, but I mean, that's
cool. Wow.
That's the power of music. I think that there's this connection and this appreciation and reverence. I don't know what the right word is, but I mean, just when you were telling me about that, and Wes, you were talking about the conductor, it's the same thing. It's like I can literally envision, and I get like this good feeling about what that's like. I mean, that's amazing. Next, I'm gonna do a little post in the chat room. If you guys have some specific questions that you'd like me to ask, you're welcome to direct message them to me or the moderator. And the one thing that I was gonna ask you three gentlemen was maybe just some insights on what you think are things that the current generation of tuba players and young players that they should sort of know about, the things that they should focus on with their craft, or generalizations that you've sort of seen that you want to impart some wisdom so that they can be more successful. Is it okay if we start with you, Gene?
Yeah, I would say, especially now that we're in the middle of this pandemic, and I've mentioned it to a couple people, this is such a golden opportunity that we have some time that we can go ahead and listen to a lot of music that we have always thought, well, we're too busy, we'll get around to it. It always ends up being the last thing that we do, and we just don't do it enough. So in a way, things that can be done at any time are done at no time. So I would suggest that um, uh, students who know they're going to, for instance, eventually going to be playing or should be acquainted with, say, for instance, the Nielsen symphonies, just go ahead and assign themselves, have the discipline to assign yourselves to listen to, say, 2 Nielsen symphonies a week. Go ahead and actually put it in your date book and listen to the Beethoven symphonies. Sit yourself down with a score and watch a Beethoven string quartet, an early one, a middle period one, and a late one. I mean, these are things that we just never have time to do because we always have some mindless rehearsals to go to. We never have enough time to go ahead and do it ourselves. So this is just a really great opportunity to take advantage of doing that. If you have a chance to look up Dave Zirkel's syllabus, Dave Zirkel is he was at UGA, University of Georgia at Athens. He's now switching over and taking over at University of Michigan now. But if you can get a hold of his POWs, his pieces of the week, he's got a whole listing of lessons quarter by quarter for his students to listen to, of symphonic music, of orchestral music, of chamber music, of jazz artists, of specific conductors, of specific singers, and it's a great listing of the top of the things that you should inundate yourself with. And the more you start to inculcate this stuff inside your head, the more you'll be able to bring that stuff up when you have to play a Bordoni. I mean, if you can play a Bordoni like you could, like you and have the phrasing abilities of a Pavarotti, I mean, my gosh, what else do you need? You know, usually our Bordoni is, you know, we just we barely get beyond dragging our knuckles off the ground and just discovered fire. You know, in the meantime, you've got these great artists like Maria Callas and stuff who are giving these great ideas of how to play phrases and try to get things across. And I think it'd be a tremendous thing to go ahead, schedule yourself some time to actually go ahead and listen to a lot of music. And just kind of as a sideline, I've really got to talk to Floyd now about I didn't realize, I knew you'd taken vocal lessons, Floyd, but I didn't realize it was a big study for you, that you had spent a lot of time. You studied Puccini and did all that. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, that's just incredible.
I had such a great voice teacher in high school. And he was very disappointed that I didn't go ahead with it, but it was really hard. It really was hard. But I went my first year of college at University of Kansas before Indiana. I did get to do things like the solo parts from Haydn, Lord Nelson, Mass. And I got to sing some great music. But what it gave me was an education that tuba players don't get. Music. And if I can start talking now very briefly, I want to crescendo on what you were saying, Gene, because in today's world, everybody is trying to get an orchestral job, and all of the auditions have very specific lists. And this is the only music that all the tuba players play who come to me for lessons. And you don't learn music from orchestral excerpts. You do in some ways, but it's a tool that we have to get a job. But we have to spend time with music. And my time was in my singing years. Right now, with the pandemic, and I'm limping and trying to teach online, there are no auditions coming up. So what are we playing? We're playing solo music, and we're playing music, and we're playing Bach, and we're playing Schumann and Penderecki and everything. And it is so refreshing for me. And now I'm finding how refreshing it is for the students, because they don't have to practice that solo from demise to singer for the 1001 time.
I heard that adjective, by the way.
But I just hope the young players will broaden their horizons and do what you're talking about, Gene, or what Dave Zirkel's talking about. You gotta listen to music. There's no other way, because you won't be able to fit in with other musicians, because the musical level of these orchestras are so high. The tuba players have to be there too, or they won't be accepted.
Yeah. Wes, your thoughts on what younger players should be looking for, trying to do?
I will actually emphasize, I think, or expand a little bit on what Gene said, and that is that he mentioned discipline. And that's not just in discipline listening to recordings or studying scores, but discipline in practice, to make sure that you're practicing what you need to practice, not necessarily what's fun to play or easy to play. Practicing is difficult work, and if a person is really practicing, they're probably not sounding their best, because you don't need to practice the things you can play the best. You need to practice the things that you can't play so well. And Gene mentioned time. We're living in a time now with this awful pandemic, and the orchestras are all shut down, and nothing is going on. As Floyd said, there are no auditions. Nothing is on the horizon right now. And I think that all players, not just young players, but we're talking to young players now. When something is not so good, or when something is bad, you have to find a way to make something good out of it. You have to make it work to your advantage. And Gene touched on this with the time aspect in the pandemic. We have time now. Students have time, much more time than they had this time last year. And that time could be devoted to development of playing, development of musical knowledge, spending the time. Don't pine away about you can't go to the beach or you can't go to a party. Spend the time doing something productive for the future when this pandemic goes away. That's one thing. And then I look at myself. I'm retired now, but when I was in the orchestra, especially during the last 10 years or so, time was an issue. Finding enough time to practice was an issue. Not that I didn't have the hours in the day, but I couldn't get up on Thursday morning and practice for 4 hours and then go down and play a concert that night and sound, really good, because I'd be too tired. And so I was always looking for time, looking for a day off, looking for, if I had a week off, that's great. I could practice for a week. Now you've got a pandemic. Now, if you're a professional player, you don't have to worry about performances. You don't have to worry about being tired. You can practice until you're exhausted, and it's not going to hurt your reputation at all on a performance. So the takeaway from this is, when something doesn't go well or when there's a problem, find a way to make it work for you rather than against you.
Yeah. And you said that someone should practice a lot during the pandemic, or just like organize a big conference for tuba and euphonium players. That's other
right. And it's good for social distancing too, because nobody's going to come around you when you're playing the tuba.
Now, actually, Wes,
only your mother.
That's right.
Well, yeah.
We actually had a slogan contest for the euphonium.com website for pencils, and the winner was euphonium. Social distancing made easy.
I like that.
So that's good. That's good.
I have to ask Floyd before. I don't know when we're going to end this, but Floyd, maybe you should explain about us being neighbors in San Francisco.
Oh my God! Yeah, you were the first influence on me about cars. We actually lived on what was called Guerrero Street in San Francisco in the Mission. And this was an okay area, heavy Latino. and I had studied Spanish in high school, so I was able to move around. But very quickly, we realized we lived near each other. We started hanging out, and Wes got infatuated with BMW cars. And very soon after that, I got a BMW also, a BMW 2002. Of course, my dream was always to have a 2800 CS.
Yeah.
But the BMWs that I had were the R75/6, R75/8, 1150 GS, 1200 GS. And my motorcycle was still, my BMW motorcycle is still sitting in the storage unit in Wyoming. But Wes and I had some really wonderful times. It was just amazing. It was just amazing.
Yeah, I could look out my window and see Floyd's apartment.
Yeah, that's right. What an apartment.
It wasn't much, neither of our apartments were much to brag about. However, it was better than the place that I lived in New York City. So.
Yeah.
Now, I understand also another interesting connection with this panel is that, Gene, while you were in LA, Floyd, you played in Chicago. And then, so were there any interesting things that you guys, got to talk about or share war stories and things like that while you guys were sort of on those one-year positions?
We all know that Gene has a great sense of humor. And Gene, when LA auditioned, I went and substituted for a year in Chicago. So I left San Francisco without a tuba player. And the rumor, which I think Gene started, was that Gene was going to leave LA and go to San Francisco and fill in for me in San Francisco. And this rumor started passing around all over the country. Gene, can you clarify that any better?
Well, other than having a bad memory, this is the first I've heard of it.
I liked your facial expression, Gene. I could tell you were like, "What is about to happen?"
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought of it. I mean, I've often thought about San Francisco as being a wonderful place to be, a wonderful place to live in, restaurants for every night of the week for the next century and a half. And I've dreamt about being in that place. And I often wondered, even this last time, after you left, whether I should have gone for that. I mean, I maybe there is some wanderlust in me. I mean, I could change jobs every year and probably just to experiment in different restaurants in different places. It would be, yeah, I'd love to do that. Just find Greek breakfast joints is enough to keep me occupied. So, no, I don't recall that, but if you want to restart, if we want to restart that rumor, let's do it again.
Okay. Hey, we can start worldwide dissemination of that rumor right now, just so you know.
Yeah, it makes your euphonium social distancing thing just a faded memory.
That's right. That's right. So one of the great questions that we'll probably finish on today is about what you guys do in your free time or hobbies or for fun. And I think I know a couple of the answers, but I'll let you guys answer for yourselves. Wes, do you want to go first?
My answer is easy. Everybody knows what I'm doing. I have a publishing company,
Mm-hmm.
and it keeps me quite busy. I've always been interested in publishing, and I've also been interested in the art of printing, books, typography, graphics, and music publishing. So it's been a joy to be able to bring some titles to life for tuba players that well, they may have come up to life anyway. I don't know, but when I started publishing music, there was no Arbin book for tuba, for instance.
Yeah.
There just wasn't much for tuba. There was music. We mostly played music from other instruments, and I wanted to change that. And I've done what I can to make more, especially educational material, available to tuba players. I wish that I could have had some of the things that are out now. I wish I could have had those things when I was 18 years old. It would have been terrific. So that's what I do. I publish music.
That's great. Floyd, drink Portuguese wine.
Before the pandemic, last August we moved to Portugal, and I would fly to Chicago every 2 weeks and teach. And I've been commuting to teach at DePaul since 1993, commuting from San Francisco. I now have in excess of 2 million miles on United Airlines on all of my flights around the world or wherever. But now we're in Portugal. I've already had 10 flights this year, 10 round trips since last September. But obviously right now I don't have to fly, and I'm very happy about it. But what I really enjoy, when I lived in San Francisco, I had 5 different houses. I redid them. My father was a building contractor and cabinet maker, and I did a lot of work with that. I have an incredible love for great wine, and I used to have way too many bottles, but since I recently got married 8 years ago, we managed to reduce those, not very many. And for many years, I really enjoyed my motorcycle and meeting some very, very interesting people. But at this point, we're loving living in Portugal, the culture, the food, and I love to cook. And now that I'm not having to travel as much, and now that we have this new house, I'm having to get a whole new kitchen because all the appliances are 220, not 110. So anyway, I'm looking forward to doing a lot of cooking, and once the pandemic is over, looking to travel in Europe.
Fantastic. Great stuff. How large was your wine cellar at one point in time at its peak?
About 400 bottles.
Favorite? Are you red or white?
I love both. My favorite white, which I used to be able to afford, which you can't do, is Corton Charlemagne. Mm-hmm. And my favorite red is Brunello de Montalcino, but I'll drink anything good.
Yeah. I had an amazing bottle of, I like sweet wines, but Chateau de Kim.
Yes, wonderful.
Phenomenal white wine, yeah. So, yeah. Gene, what do you do for fun?
I've had an interest in astronomy for quite a long time. I was hoping at one point that I could actually be an astronomer at one point. But there's 3 kinds of tuba players: ones who can count and ones who can't. And you need to really have math under your belt, and that definitely is something. So I'm kind of an armchair astronomer. I like to read about it, and I had an 8-inch reflector telescope, which doesn't really do too much good when you've got a lot of light pollution around you, and when you're playing in a big city, that's what you have around you, is a lot of light pollution. So I do read a lot about astronomy, and while the pandemic's going on, I discovered I've been listening to different philosophers and atheists and Christian apologists and different folks like that, biologists and that. So I've been listening to a lot of Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, and in particular Christopher Hitchens, who's an amazing speaker. I mean, I have to have a dictionary in my hand just to listen to what he has to say, and just to try to look these words up. And not that I agree with everything that everybody says, or even much of what they say, but there's some amazing arguments, uh, pro and against, and for this political idea and that political idea, and this religion and that religion. And some of the arguments are made are really. I love sense of irony. I love sarcasm, and so if I'm just tootling around the house or taking the pups out for a walk, why, I'll listen to, in particular, Christopher Hitchens. He's so dark. He's so dark. He's an amazing guy to listen to. And like I said, the vocabulary is incredible. So yeah, I mean, I enjoy it. He puts a smile on my face.
Hey, I think a lot of times that's what we need many times, is a smile on our face. And it can come from a variety of different sources or motivations and inspirations, whether it's literature, music, art, wine, publishing, and the detail of making all those corrections in the Arbenz book, right, Wes?
Yeah.
How many errors did you find in the Arbenz book when you did that first edition?
Oh, well, there were many in
Hundreds.
the Arbenz book, and then we introduced new errors into the first edition of our book, so I
Of
couldn't even
course.
count them. But
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
weeding and preening.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say an incredibly sincere thank you to you three gentlemen. This has been another phenomenal Legends session. I'm so I'm motivated. The participants sent me some messages and said, "Oh, this is a great thing." Um, just the insights that you guys have given, the great stories that we learned about Wes Jacobs tuning the piano at Gene Pokorny's house when he was younger, that Floyd and Wes lived across the street, could see each other's apartments and stuff, and that Gene was secretly pining for the San Francisco job while he was in LA. All these amazing insights, and that Wes, that you played upright bass, string bass for the Carpenters,
Yeah.
the amazing things that are there. And also, I hope for our participants that you guys get an insight into the humanity of these gentlemen, and what they are, paragons in our field of tuba playing, but paragons as musicians, paragons as people, and incredibly sharing with their time and knowledge. And with that, I thank you three gentlemen very, very much. Thank you for being a part of this, and thank you everyone for being wonderful participants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see
Pleasure.
you guys. Thanks, Adam. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. We'll see everyone later.
All right.
Bye bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Had a good time.